Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. You all have picked a really great video because we are talking about the best and worst books that I've read this year. Hi, if you're new and you don't know who I am, I'm Shelly and I love to read. I have a huge passion for books and reading, and this has been my first 6 or 7 months on BookTube, and thus my first superlatives. So today we're talking about the best and worst books that I read of 2021. These are not books that are published in 2021. They're just books that I read in this year. And then they are ranked. So my number one is my number one book that I read this year. And as we move up, it'll go towards my favorites. Okay, so without further ado, I have, I think, 7 books here, 7 of the books, and then 3 of them, I don't have them for various reasons, but I'll tell you why, and I'll definitely put up pictures somewhere over here. So, okay, starting with number 10. Oh, and they are nonfiction and fiction mixed together because I read 71, perhaps 72 books this year. I'm not sure how today will go and finishing up that last book. So I read 72 books this year, and I didn't feel like I read enough nonfiction to give it its own category, so I kind of have everything all mixed up. Before we get into any favorites, I'm actually going to have Editing Shelly talk about the worst book of 2021 because I don't want to do it. I have all positivity and sunshine right now, and I don't want to talk about my worst book of 2021, so she's going to do it for me. Okay, I see what you did here, presenting Shelly. You gave Editing Shelly the dirty job. That's all right. It's all right. We're not going to beat around the books. The worst book that I read this year was Sanctuary by William Faulkner. Over-the-top violent, especially towards women, with a pretty loosey-goosey plot. I mean, was it a plot? Really? Just awful. I found no redeeming value in reading this book. The worst part is that it was my first Faulkner. And so now, after I've read this, I'm like, Faulkner, you need to back up. And the moment he kind of inches forward one step, I have to say, look now, you better step back, brother. Stay away. I want nothing to do with him, which is a shame because he is a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winning author. He is a Nobel Prize for Literature laureate. I mean, he's got some stuff to his name. And I'm so closed off to reading Faulkner because of Sanctuary. It is by far the worst book that I read this year. Thanks, Editing Shelly. Starting in at number 10. I have my list here. Starting in at number 10. This was one that I listened to twice, and it was Unfollow by Megan Phelps Roper. This is Megan Phelps Roper's memoir. And she grew up in a very extremist church here in the United States called the Westboro Baptist Church, which was founded by her father, and which he had started a very famous inflammatory picketing ministry. Let me just say that again. He started a very inflammatory picketing ministry. And their church really grew in fame because of this inflammatory message that they spread. And really the book is about Megan coming to terms with her childhood, telling her side of the story about the inner workings of this outwardly hateful church. And she talks about the inner workings of their family and the church and so on and so forth. And then it talks about her change. She talks about how she really followed in her mother's and grandfather's footsteps of wanting to spread this ministry, spread this message of this picketing ministry, and how she changed her mind about that road that she was going down, and then how her compassion grew. It's a really touching memoir. I listened to the audio, I think I mentioned that, and it was fantastic. Actually, I loved it so much I told everyone I could about it when I had read it. Okay, my numbers 9 through 6. So you can mix these up. I feel like this is the order that I settled on in this moment, but it would be hard to, I feel like these could easily be mixed up, but there's 2 that have to stay in a specific order. So the next one is another one I don't have. I read it on my Kindle, and that was Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. This was my first work of Marilynne Robinson, and I was really impressed by it. Let me tell you what it's about. It's her fiction book following the Reverend John Ames, I believe, and he knows that the end of his life is near. You know, he's getting older, and he's got this very young son. And this is a diary of his where he's trying to bestow the life lessons that he's learned onto his son and to leave his son something of like a legacy of his own life. And so there's a lot of reflection, a ton of compassion that's so subtle and so deft. It's right underneath the surface. And it just was so much more than I thought it was going to be. And it's one that I've continued to think about throughout the year. I read this pretty early on in the year, and it's one that's just really stuck with me. And it's also one of the first books that I've read where it was set in Iowa, and now I'm very curious about the state. Just a beautiful, beautiful book. Really loved it. Okay, coming in at number 8, finally something I can show you. Number 8 would be Aristophanes, Liz Estrada. I've talked about this a bunch. I actually gave my copy away, and this is a different copy than I read, but I wanted to learn more about Aristophanes' writing, the comedic style of their writing, and so I picked up 4 plays by Aristophanes, which I plan to read in 2022. Liz Estrada is a play that is about the battle of the sexes, essentially. The women are so tired of their men going to war and fighting, and they're sick of it. And so they end up taking hold of 2 things: the bank, so the men don't have money to fight a war, and then they also decide to withhold lovemaking from their men. And the crux and the humor of the play is around that. It's a bit sexual, but what I like about this is that it's opened up a whole world of Greek plays to me, and I want to explore more from Aristophanes, not only just more works, but also different translations. I am really curious to read Liz Estrada in a different, more antiquated language translation. I'm just so curious about the play and the characters and revisiting it and being in that silly world. I just was so unexpectedly surprised by it. I just loved it. I loved it. And so that was definitely a stand-up for the year. Now I don't know where to put this. All right, numbers 7 and 6 are going to be Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. Hilary Mantel tells the story, a fictionalized story of Thomas Cromwell in her Wolf Hall series, well, her Thomas Cromwell series. I'm going to be reading the 3rd one in January and February of this year, so I'm very excited about that. But what Hilary Mantel is able to do is that Thomas Cromwell is often, in the Tudor period, he is often cast as kind of a brute because of his ruthless nature and his him being an advisor to King Henry VIII. And what Hilary Mantel is able to do is that she tells a story where the audience, the reader, both sympathizes and roots for somebody who is not the best. He's almost like an anti-hero, the best way I can describe it, because he has these moments where morally he does some shady things, some morally shady things, but yet you are still rooting for Cromwell. I even said that Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell is the closest I've ever read to a character that is most like my husband. My husband's name is Ted, and so we call him Tedwell in my book club that is reading these books. So I clearly really just love these books. I mean, the main character is someone close to my husband, and I adore my husband, or the description is what I imagine my husband would be if he was ever memorialized into a character, or was ever characterized. Then Cromwell is very much like my husband Ted. So I really loved these books. Her writing may not be for everyone. It is very playful and descriptive, but it's subtle and it's quiet, and sometimes I would have to go back and reread passages or reread chapters because she doesn't just hand you the history. She's not saying that this person is so-and-so and this is their role in society. She does it very deftly and very subtly. And so there are definitely times when people are moving up and down in the court and she doesn't tell you, you just are expected to follow along. And that was part of the fun of the journey, but I could see why some people really didn't care for her style. But man, I mean, I loved these books. They were wonderful, and it didn't hurt that I read them with a truly fantastic group. So I hold these books in a really special place in my heart, and I imagine that they'll be favorites for a very long time. Okay, number 5. Oh, number 5 I just talked about and I just finished. Actually, there are a couple books. Hopefully I'll put these into chapters, and then I'll put an asterisk next to the books that I'm still kind of curious and watching myself about because I just finished them. But the Iliad is one of them, and that's what comes in at number 5. Homer's The Iliad in the Fitzgerald translation. Wow, I just did a whole video about this, so I will link that down below. But wow, this was one of the most rewarding reads, I would have to say, out of the bunch. I really learned a lot from this reading. Again, I reflect all about it in another video, but I learned a lot about how to be a better reader from this text. And there was just such a beauty in the language, a beauty in the story. I don't know, there was just something magical about the Iliad. And there is something that I cannot wait to revisit about it. So what this story follows, it's one of the oldest, so I feel kind of silly summarizing it, is that Achilles gets angry at a character named Agamemnon and refuses to fight on that side anymore. And that causes a lot of issues. And so as the Trojans and Greeks are fighting, the gods get involved, and warriors die and conquer, and it's a lot of that, but it's also a lot about relationships and about grief and about sorrow and about honor and about things that are so palpably human that it just touched me. I just love this book. So number 5. So you're like, okay, Shelly, that's number 5. Then what's number 4? Number 4 will be Persuasion by Jane Austen. This was, as I've mentioned again in some of this wrap-up stuff, but me and Jane Austen didn't have the best relationship. I sort of thought that she was a snob, and I didn't want to get to know her at all. And then I met something called Jane Austen July, and I decided I'm a bit harsh on Jane Austen, so I'm going to try again. And one of the books that I tried again with was Persuasion. And it tells the story of a long lost love, being in love in your childhood and then taking 2 separate paths and then finding one another again, and what that means what that means for the moment now to have loved someone back then, and how to move forward, and in so many things. And there are despicable characters, there are clever characters, there's just everything, humor, witty dialogue, and it's one of her shortest books, Austen's shortest books, and it's her last book. And in that way, I thought it was very approachable because, you're not getting into this chunkster that you're not sure if you're going to like. And so as I picked this up, one of the reasons why it makes it so high on the list is that there's a passage, and I won't give it away, that is so moving. It's so, I could almost tear up now. It's so emotionally moving, and it's done in this very delicate way that is not overbearing or overdone, and it was so beautiful. I was shocked to find that Austen had that sentimentality in her person, and was able to convey that on the page. It was really a beautiful, beautiful book. And definitely makes it into this top 10. Okay, number 3. We're really getting up there. Number 3, that would be Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. This book I can't stop thinking about. I read it in August, I think, or I have a video about it. I'll link that below. The premise is not intriguing at all. It follows Clarissa Dalloway in A Day in the Life of London. But what's intriguing about it is that the style is fantastic. It's a stream of consciousness, multi-perspective novel that tells a whole bunch of stories, and it talks a bit about isolation and about anxiety and our internal lives, and how our internal lives often don't match our exteriors. And I've read stream of consciousness before, and I didn't always love it. I've never been like a huge fan of it. I've always liked it and thought it was clever. But there were moments in this that truly shocked me, almost as if you're in your own mind, and then you almost hear like a horn blow, and you're like taken out of your own imagination and consciousness, or something like that. Like you're in your own mind, and then something happens, and it rips you out of that state of mind, and you're in something else. You're experiencing like real life and something that's going on. There were moments in this book that was very much my experience. I was in the mind of a character, and then something else happened, and you're like ripped from this moment to something else, to turn towards something else. And that experience, the creating of that experience was phenomenal, along with all of the themes that she talks about, was really, really beautiful. And I know I missed a lot, one of which was the setting, the straight up setting I missed. I was like, why is Clarissa Dalloway so excited to go on to London? It's because the pandemic of the 1918 pandemic was recently over, and so this was one of the first times that Clarissa Dalloway is out shopping after being stuck indoors for so long. And once that was pointed out to me in the comments, it again sort of revised the way that I thought about this book. And it seems like this book, it's been doing that a lot. Somebody will make a comment, and all of a sudden I'll be like, yeah, that's right. That's renewed my interest in this novel. So yeah, number 3, probably because it's taken up a lot of brain space in the last couple of months for me, and that I simply can't shake thinking about it in the most wonderful and special way, I suppose. Okay, number 2. Oh, I have to grab it. One moment. Number 2 is going to be one that's going to have an asterisk, because I just finished this 2 weeks ago or so, and that is Catherine the Great by Robert K. Massey. I love this biography. This is a biography about Catherine the Great, the Empress, the sovereign ruler of Russia in the 1700s. And wow, I mean, wow. Oh my goodness. How can I gush about a book more? Okay, let me gather yourself up. So it tells all about Catherine's life, and what's so amazing about Robert K. Massey is that he uses these literary techniques in a nonfiction book that make you want to keep reading. There were just characters that I loved and characters that I didn't love, but they're not characters, they're real people. But the way that Massey wrote it, he was telling not just the story of Catherine herself, but of all of the people around her, and he always kept her in mind. He always kept Catherine in mind. And how did these people relate to Russia also in relation to Catherine, and did they help her, or did they not help her in what she was trying to do? And she was so forward thinking, and wonderful, just wonderful. I really, really loved this biography. I thought it was fantastic. I want to read more of Robert K. Massey. I want to read more biographies, actually, in general, because this experience was so fantastic. And Catherine, she was amazing. She was a female ruler for a powerful nation at the time. And she was incredibly humane. In many ways. Not everything she did was to the best interest of everyone, which is pretty much impossible, but she made a huge impact. And the things that she set forth at the beginning of her rule come to pass like decades after her life has ended. This is going to be one where I just need to stop talking about it, and it might be in the middle of a thought, but here we go. We're stopping now. My number 1 book. Oh man, my number 1. It's been my number 1 since I read it. It may come to a surprise to some of you, but maybe not. I did talk about it on my channel. And I don't have a copy, which is a real darn shame. But my number one book is An Unnecessary Woman by rachelle.e.swearingen. I'll put up a picture somewhere. Wow. Okay, so this tells the story of Aaliyah, who formerly ran a bookstore in Beirut and now is living a more quiet and lonesome or solitary life in an apartment in Beirut. And there was something about Aaliyah that was magical. How do you talk about a book that you just absolutely love? So I'm gonna try and narrow it down. So what Al-Amendine does is that he defines women's roles in society, at least in Beirut, and then he simultaneously creates a character that breaks these rules to society. And she does them in these very subtle ways, sometimes very subtle and sometimes not. And there was something just very empowering to me about that. So for example, she's independent. She lives on her own, and her family didn't like that. Not only her family, but the family of her husband, and how she manages that. She loves literature, so I was loving hanging out with her. She's got this sassy attitude, which I absolutely adored, and she kind of, you're in her head sometimes, and as she's describing scenes, she's being quite snarky and curmudgeon about it, but in this very distinct way. Her character was so real and so palpable to me. But probably my favorite thing about her was that she led this quiet life where she translated one novel a year. And she had this very specific routine. It was only for her own pleasure. And it was a little bit of an homage to her love for books and reading. And so throughout the whole story, she talks about all of this literature, a lot of which I hadn't read, most of it I haven't read, but there was something that I just didn't mind. It felt like, I asked myself this, if she was a booktuber, would I watch her channel? And I was like, absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. I put An Unnecessary Woman up to a litmus test. Earlier this year, as we've been having conversations on BookTube about what makes a classic or what makes a fantastic book. And someone said, actually Hannah from Hannah's Books said that classics can't be spoiled. That even if you know the spoilers, the enjoyment of the book isn't hindered because you know the spoiled bits. And that's the test that I put up to An Unnecessary Woman. And actually, the book was spoiled for me. The climax was totally told in another video, in Steve Donahue's video, where I picked up this book because of his recommendation. But he totally said the climax. So I knew it going in. And yet, when I got to the climax of An Unnecessary Woman, I was so moved. It moved me so much. And I cared so much about Aaliyah and what she was doing that I wanted everything to work out for her. And that was a really pivotal moment for me in my reading life, because I've always been like, don't spoil things. I don't want to be spoiled. Don't tell me I'm because of spoilers. All the spoilers, don't tell me. But now I care a lot less. I'm like, it's all about the journey and getting to know the characters and being immersed in a setting and going along with what the writer has to say. And if their one trick is the climax, if their one great thing, if the linchpin is that peak, then maybe it's not that great of a book. And it was really cool to take that test and to test it on my favorite read this year and to see it pass. That was like really, really cool for me. And I think that it's one that I would love to reread and I would love to revisit, and that I just phenomenally enjoyed this year and has really stuck with me. Actually, when I was telling my husband this list is like a bit of a practice run, I got a little emotional talking about Aaliyah and An Unnecessary Woman, because I just found her to be so spectacular. Maybe not for everyone. I know that people have read this and not loved it, but it really truly was my favorite book of this year. Okay, that's it for me. Yeah, tell me, what was your best and worst books of this year? I would love to know. I'm very curious. I've revealed mine. Now it's your turn. And that's it. That's all from me. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. And I will see you in my next one. Bye, guys.